Supersonic is honestly one of the most iconic and greatest rewards in gaming. Do 7 challenging special stages, and you unlock a super form that makes the game even more fun than you can imagine. Not only are you invincible, but you're even faster, and being fast is genuinely rewarding in these games. So why am I making this video? What could possibly be the problem with this simple reward? What do I have to nitpick about today? Well, I want to talk about how Supersonic went from being a pretty fun reward to just a novelty. Let's get into it. It all starts with a jump to 3D. If the Sega Genesis era of Supersonic would be considered the golden age, I'd consider the early to mid 3D era the story age, where Supersonic was nothing more than a plot device, spanning from Adventure 1 to Sonic Unleashed. Now, I honestly wouldn't consider this a bad thing. This isn't where the problem starts, but this is where things change up for the form. Sonic stories around this time were longer and more impactful than, say, Sonic games of the recent era. So it makes sense that Supersonic would be used as a climactic trump card in every single one of these games, even if it becomes predictable. But you know what? It worked. Because all of these final Supersonic boss fights worked differently and felt engaging in their own way. Even the storybook games to an extent had these, and I'd argue that they were very fun and even the peak of those games. Though I will say sacrificing Supersonic in real levels was somewhat of a blunder, because though there are games where I'd argue Supersonic wouldn't even work in to begin with, like Sonic Unleashed, since he's already so damn fast, at the same time there are Sonic games where a faster, invincible, and less slippery form would have taken benefit from, like Sonic Adventure 1 or Sonic Heroes, these games with bigger and longer levels, with more enemies and more combat. I feel like having Supersonic in these games would have made them just more fun and replayable. But you know what? Supersonic being a plot device isn't even a bad thing. It's definitely a change, it doesn't feel rewarding, it is predictable, but it's fucking awesome, it's fun, and it works in its own unique way. However, in 2010, this would all change with the release of Sonic Colors, the first mainline Sonic game to completely not have Supersonic in the story. And you know what? It honestly doesn't matter, because Sonic Colors doesn't even have a good story. But regardless, after collecting every single red star ring, you are given the option to use him for the first time ever in 3D stages. And dear God, this is definitely where the downfall of Supersonic begins, as the form just does not work here. And the reason is because Sonic Colors is not a fast game. It's definitely a short game, but it's not a fast one. It has a lot of stop-and-go platforming, and that's because this game was designed to be like a Mario game. And the boost makes Sonic fast enough to where you really don't even need a super form at all. It doesn't really matter. And that's not to mention the Wisp powers, which the game is absolutely designed around. And in order to use Supersonic in the first place, you have to turn off the Wisp powers. And this doesn't make the levels easier, as the levels are genuinely more fun and enjoyable with the Wisp power-ups, as, you know, they're completely designed around them. So using Supersonic in this game just makes the levels inherently longer and less convenient to get through. It's nothing more than a novelty. It's a cool thing to have, but it just doesn't work in practice. But we all know that after Colors came Generations, which does bring back Supersonic to the main story, even if it's for one of the worst boss fights ever created. But upon beating the game, you unlock Supersonic for both classic and modern stages. And I just want to say that I love this. Having Supersonic be unlockable after beating a Supersonic boss just works so well. And for the most part, Supersonic isn't even bad in the modern levels. He's noticeably faster than base Sonic, there is no gimmick to throw it off, and it just makes boosting more enjoyable. Though I will say that the ring gauge depletes way faster than it should, and to actually use him, you have to use all your skill points, which in the grand scheme of things is definitely not worth it, as there are inherently better skills in this game to use. But as a novelty, and just for fun, it works. It honestly is fun to use, and it's worth using. However, Classic Sonic is a different story entirely, as for some reason, they decided to strip away the most crucial aspect of Supersonic. It's speed. Supersonic in the classic stages doesn't have any real noticeable speed increase. He's still invincible, but honestly, who cares? I think what makes it worse is that even if the form was way faster, it wouldn't matter, because classic Sonic's Spin Dash is already a super form of its own. But hey, at the end of the day, it's not the worst case scenario. We get Supersonic as a plot device and as a playable formation, which is a good thing. It's definitely a step up from Colors. Unfortunately, this trend would not carry on following into Sonic Lost World. Just like Sonic Colors, we have a no-show story for Supersonic, which is fine, because just like Colors, the story isn't even good here to begin with. However, despite this, he is still playable in the main levels if you get every single red ring, which is a massive chore. And I will say, he's definitely not worth the chore, as although I think it's cool that they replace his Spin Dash with a boost, and the Wisp powers in this game aren't as important as they are in Colors, giving him more use, it doesn't matter, because he's just not fun to use in the first place. A lot of this game is automated, and Supersonic himself isn't really given a speed boost. And even if he was, this game opts for slower paced gameplay. So at the end of the day, Supersonic's just kind of a novelty again. And in case all that wasn't enough, we have to talk about Sonic Forces. This is where I'd argue Supersonic hit an all-time low. Not only does the story not use the form whatsoever, even though it arguably would have worked, but on top of that, the form itself isn't even in the base game. Rather, Supersonic is relegated to unpaid free DLC, which at one point was paid DLC. As you probably know, Sega had tried selling Supersonic for $2, until they got so much backlash for it they had to make it free. And honestly, it doesn't matter, because it's useless once again. It's just nothing more than a novelty, and you can't even call it that. In the modern stages, Supersonic doesn't offer much of a cool speed increase like in Generations, and the stages are less than like 2 minutes, and 70% of them are automated. So by the time you get 50 rings, the stage is already over or you're trapped in an endless automation, meaning you have like no real time to use Supersonic, and even when you do, it's a useless transformation. And as for Classic Sonic, it's pretty much the same deal as Generations, invincibility and nothing more. So there you have it. Just like that, the fall of Supersonic. What used to be a cool, fun, rewarding prize, or even just an awesome way to wrap up an impactful story, is now relegated to a no-show collectible reward, used merely as a replacement for the invincibility box. And that right there is a problem with Supersonic. He's not a reward anymore, he's just a novelty. They just throw him in the game as a little Easter egg. Actually, using him serves no purpose, as it used to. But thankfully, in the last 2 years, the narrative has changed. With the release of Sonic Frontiers, Supersonic has been utilized as more of a boss-exclusive transformation, just like in the adventure days. And I gotta say, this works. It completely works, as every boss uses Supersonic, and it's just, he's fun to use again. It definitely would have been cool to have him in the open zone, flying around and shit, but relegating him to be an exclusive form to take down really powerful enemies is certainly a lot better than being a glorified invincibility box. Overall, if I had to pick a way to interpret Supersonic, I'd say Generations had the best concept, and maybe not in execution, but just in concept. I like the idea of unlocking your final boss formation and being able to put it into use in the main levels for better times and faster gameplay. It would have been great to have those in the adventure era games, where I feel like they would have actually been better in practice. Even if this is a topic that could be excused as a small nitpick, it's one I wanted to bring to the table, as Supersonic, in my opinion, is more than just an invincibility box. Supersonic is a reward, not a novelty.
Complain, complain, complain. All you do is complain. What's next? You got a problem with the boost?
That's a good idea.